Hey everybody, Sean Halley from Line 6. Today we're doing the DT50, which is the newest collaboration between Line 6 and Reinhold Bogner. So it's a different design for us in the sense that it's kind of like 4 boutique amps on one chassis. So we took voicings from 4 of the classic topologies from amps of yesteryear, put them all together in one chassis to give you a starting off point for your own tonal explorations. But the power amp can reconfigure itself electrically in real time to better match what's going on in the preamp, so you have tons of tonal variety. So we're going to go through all the knobs, all the switches, and then at the end, we'll basically go through and listen to all the voicings to give you an idea of what it sounds like. So stick around. We're going for a deep dive.
All right, bring on the pretty pictures. So it is a hybrid design. It has 4 HD preamp models in it that provide the gain stage and the tone stack for each one of the 4 voicings, and those drive this amazing reconfigurable 2 power amp that Reinhold came up with that kills. So it comes in 3 flavors. It comes in a head, a 112 combo, which is what we're going to be using today and you'll be seeing, and also a 212 combo. The 112 combo has a custom designed 12-inch Celestion speaker in it, and the 212 design has this same speaker in addition to a classic vintage 30. As I mentioned before, it is a 2-channel design, and one of the great things about the DT50 is that both channels can be set identically if you wish. So if you fall in love with one voicing and just wish that you had that same voicing on channel B but louder for solos, you can easily do that. It's very flexible. Now we're looking at the front panel of the amp. So on the left-hand side, you have the inputs for the guitar, both high and low. So if you have a really loud pickup that you can't get clean no matter what you do, you can plug it into the low. To the right of that, you have the controls for channel A. They work pretty much as labeled, except for in voicing 3, when they work more like a boost cut kind of a tone circuit from a classic AC30 kind of an amp. So when you're in voicing 3, play around with those knobs to make sure you know what they're doing. So to the right of that, you have the switch for channels A and B, and then to the right of that, channel B. Works just the same as channel A. Like I said, it can be set exactly the same if you'd like. One note about the reverb knob, it is the only effect on the amp. So if you decide that you want to add effects to it, you can either use the effects loop with traditional pedals, or you can use a Pod HD unit over Line 6 link. To the right of that, you have the controls for the power amp, which is where a lot of the magic in the DT50 lives, and where we're going to spend a lot of time. So to explain this section fully, we should probably start with the switch in the upper left-hand corner with the Roman numerals around it. So this is the voicing switch. When you flick this from 1, 2, 3, and 4, it changes the preamp, the tone stack, and also the negative feedback loop topology that the power amp is currently employing. Now, if you're not familiar with negative feedback, you can think about it like a voltage that's being fed to the power tubes to keep them in check or hold them back. If they were horses, it would be the reins or the bridle or whatever you call that. I'm not an equestrian. But the point being, the more control voltage fed to the power tubes, the more in check they are, the more wide open it runs. So in voicing 3, there is 0 feedback in the power amp. Below that, you have the switch for pentode and triode behavior, which basically determines how the power amp tubes are wired. So relative to pentode, in triode mode, you're going to get a little bit less gain and a little bit less volume because the tubes are being wired slightly differently. Above and to the right of that, you have the switch for class operation. So you can tell the amp is currently set to class A, which means that it's running at 25 watts and it's cathode biased. The selection above that would be class AB operation, which is 50 watts and it's fixed bias. They do sound different. In class AB mode, it's going to have more headroom because it's not running the amp as hard, basically. So class A is going to sound more aggressive and maybe a little bit louder depending on where you've got some of the knobs set. Below that, you have the switch for standby. It is a tube amp, so follow normal tube amp procedures. Always fire the amp up with the standby down, wait 30 seconds or so, and then flick it on. Probably a good idea to turn the amp off first with the standby and then the power switch. Doesn't make any difference to the operation, but it does mean that the next time you turn the amp on, the standby will be off already, which is just good tube amp behavior. Now, in the middle of this whole section, you have the master knob, and it is special. So in normal operation, when you turn the knob up, the amp gets hella loud, just like it's supposed to. But if you look underneath it, you can see it says pull for low volume, and that's because it's also a switch. So when you pull it out, it retapers the volume knob to turn the power amp way down, and then turns the power amp models on inside the DT50. And it does this to give you a better playing experience for when you're trying to play very quietly at whisper volumes when the person sleeping in the room next door knows where your wallet is. And I would not suggest, by the way, that you gig with that switch pulled out. There's a better way to do it. Turn the master all the way up, and then use the channel volumes to control how loud the amp is. And that brings us to the back panel. So on the bottom of the right-hand side, you have the speaker outputs. So you can see you have two 4-ohm outs there, two 8-ohm outs, and a 16-ohm out. Follow the legend printed around the speaker jacks and you'll be fine. Above that, you have the cabinet simulated direct out, which is actually kind of neat because it's tapped off the transformer. So it gets to sense some of the speaker interaction between the speaker and the transformer. Then it gets sent through some convolution DSP to shape it. So it's actually quite cool. To the left of that, you have the controls for the effects loop, as well as the jack. So traditional serial effects loop, send and return. That knob there is the level of the return. So insert whatever post-amp effects you want there. To the left of that, you have more stuff. If you went to school where I did in Texas, that's not MIDI, that's MIDI. But in any case, it supports the full MIDI spec. And not only that, the knobs will send continuous control messages out the MIDI jacks if you want to use them to control other stuff. Below and to the left of that, you have the foot switch jack, which simply switches back and forth between channels A and B with a latching foot switch. And below that, you have the jacks for L6 link, which is a brand new protocol that allows the DT50 to talk to either other DT50s or a Pod HD and send digital audio and control information over one cable. When it's slaved to a Pod HD unit, you can literally mix and match power amp and preamp guts, something you can't do when the DT50 is in standalone mode. So it's actually quite cool. If you're interested in seeing how that works, there'll be another video on that entire environment, but it certainly works fantastically in standalone mode and it's not necessary. So we should go play some.
Okay, so let's start to get an idea of what it actually does, what it sounds like. So I've got my trusted Telecaster, which has been in mothballs for a number of years. So when I move the pickup selector switch, I'm sure you'll hear some crunchiness. Sorry about that. Plugged right into the front of the DT50. And we're using the first voicing, which is the blackface topology. And the channel's kind of dimed, and this is what it does. Kind of fun. It's kind of what it's supposed to do, isn't it? Right. So let's go to number 2, which is the English voicing, kind of the more of the Marshall-y Plexius kind of thing, a little bit. So we'll pop down here, and we'll change a little bit. Let's make it a little bit brighter. Turn down the volume a little bit. So we get. Okay, so let's go to voicing 3. So this is the British chime channel. This is where things get a little interesting because it's an AC30 basically in terms of the way the knob behavior works. So when you're playing around in voicing 3, move those knobs around a lot to figure out what they're doing because they're not doing the same thing, and it will take you a second to get used to where they sound the best. But once you go to voicing 3 and you get the knobs where you like them, you'll be rewarded with something that sounds extremely British. Yeah. So let's go to number 4. So that's the modern high gain variety. Now the knobs are back to doing what they're labeled as doing. So we'll dime the gain, change the bass a little bit, change the mids, probably turn the master down a little bit. Here's number 4. All right, so that's the 4 voicings, but let's hear what the power amp does by itself. So if we go back up to number 2 and park it there, we can move around the Class A-B switch and the Pentode triode switch and see how much influence those guys can have. So here's 2. Turn the gain down a little bit, get a good sound. So right now we're in Class A-B, which means the power amp is running fixed biased, 50 watts. When I go to Class A, it's going to be running 25 watts and cathode biased, so it's going to have less headroom and be a little bit more aggressive sounding. So here's AB. A. AB. Makes a big difference. And then you have that Pentode triode switch. So here's Pentode again. Triode. Pentode. So you can hear how much difference those make. And depending on the voicing you're in, it will make more or less difference because each voicing depends more or less on the bias and on Pentode triode behavior. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the DT50 is and what it does. It was definitely designed to sound really good naked and sort of replace an entire room full of combo amps, if that makes sense. If you're at all curious about how it works over L6 link with a Pod HD, there'll be another video for that. But if not, just go to a store and plug into one. I think you'll be very surprised at how much GUI tube goodness we were able to get in there. So thanks a bunch for your time. I'll see you again. Cheers.